There are hundreds of keywords in Magic the Gathering. Some are even brilliant enough to stand the test of time and cement themselves as evergreen keywords. Haste, flying, vigilance, trample. These are just a few of the masterpieces of game design that have persisted throughout Magic the Gathering for over 30 years. And in that time, we've also seen keywords like affinity, cycling, and riot become fan favorites without ever earning the prestige of being evergreen keywords. But one of Magic's oldest keywords is also one of its most infamous. This keyword is known for being overly complicated and, in some instances, overly powerful. It is one of Magic the Gathering's biggest design mistakes and a critical piece of history. I am of course speaking of none other than banding. This video has no sponsored ads, so I thought I'd tell you that the Academic Deck Box is back in local game stores, and if it is not at your local game store, Card Kingdom has an ample resupply in both classic and new colors at cardkingdom.com/TCC. The Academic Deck Box is a deck box that I helped design in partnership with GameGenic, who, without a doubt, make some of the best Magic the Gathering accessories that are on the market today. I wanted to make a deck box for everyone, whether you play Standard or Commander, whether you want to store your cards by themselves or in individual deck boxes within the Academic, and whether you single, double, or even triple sleeve, the Academic will hold all of that and more. It's something that I'm extremely proud of, a deck box for everyone, made with the highest quality materials and, again, available at local game stores worldwide or via my Card Kingdom affiliate link. Card Kingdom, sponsor of this channel, one of the few, if only, Magic the Gathering card sellers with a recognized union. So even if the Academic Deck Box is not for you, be sure to browse their vast library of Magic the Gathering singles and accessories via my affiliate link. Banding was introduced in the very beginning of Magic the Gathering's history, all the way back in Alpha, the first Magic set. Despite that, there's a good chance you've never heard of banding or even seen a card with the word banding printed upon it. Or perhaps you've only heard of banding as the punchline of a joke online, probably made by someone like me. Regardless, most Magic players have never played with this keyword at any point in their Magic journey. This is because banding was almost immediately abandoned by Wizards of the Coast for being too confusing at the best of times and too powerful at the worst of them. And thus, many Magic the Gathering players ask the question, what the hell even is banding? Why did it get written into the game at all, and why was it so swiftly and permanently removed? All of this and more will be explored, but first, let's make sure we understand what this keyword even does in the first place. When a creature with banding attacks, it can form a band with any number of creatures with banding, and up to one creature without. This band attacks as a single unit, almost like it becomes a single creature. And the entire band can be blocked by a single creature. However, this is the crucial part of what makes banding strong. When your band of creatures is blocked, you choose how the damage from your opponent's creatures is assigned. And you can choose to over-assign damage when you do so. This means if your Banalish hero forms a band with your Banalish infantry and Savannah Lions, and gets blocked by your opponent's Crawworm, you can choose to have your band deal its 4 total damage to the worm, and choose to have the worm deal all 6 of its damage to the Savannah Lions, meaning you effectively traded your 1-mana creature for their 6-mana creature, all thanks to banding. And now you can see one of the greatest strengths of banding, which is the flavor of it. The idea was that a small group of weak creatures could band together and become something greater than the sum of their parts. That a small group of knights could work together and destroy a vicious dragon while suffering minimal casualties in return. And in this regard, I'm going to say it, banding was a slam dunk. Your board of otherwise puny creatures suddenly become a threat that puts your opponent in real danger, and it's easy to imagine how it could come to be in the first place. It's the 1980s and you're Richard Garfield. You're a student at the University of Pennsylvania, and you have this idea for a wizard card game featuring powerful spells and monsters and this weird resource system called mana. The cards in the game will be divided into 5 colors, each of which have a distinct and flavorful identity. You're designing this game with your friends, playtesting it, and honing the rules based on what you discover. One of the things you notice is that board states can get pretty bogged down, as both players add more and more creatures to their side of the field. This makes combat grind to a halt, as both players identify that attacking with their creatures would result in devastating casualties. So you determine there needs to be methods for breaking through these board stalls. You come up with a few ways of doing this. First, you think up the idea of the flying mechanic, allowing creatures that evidently fly to fly right over the heads of those creatures who do not. In this instance, you have knocked the idea out of the park. Flying is flavorful, it's powerful, and best of all, it's simple to explain. Most importantly, it does exactly what you want it to do. You gave a creature evasion, and that creature became capable of breaking board stalls. You give a few other forms of evasion to different kinds of creatures. If a creature has land walk, for example, it prevents players from blocking that creature if they control lands of the stated land type. A spooky creature enchantment called Fear makes it so that non-artifact creatures cannot block the creature you enchanted. You even give some creatures Trample, allowing them to push past small blockers and deal excess damage to your opponent's face. And lastly, you try to encapsulate the ability for small creatures, especially small white creatures, to team up into a more potent fighting force using this mechanic that you thought of called banding. So from a flavor perspective, this last mechanic is a borderline masterpiece. Banding, for all of its many flaws, does indeed capture the idea of forming an army of small creatures. So if this is all true, why is banding remembered as such a failure, and why has it been entirely, completely abandoned by Wizards of the Coast designers? To answer these questions, we must look towards the dark side of banding, which is blocking with banding creatures. Banding works a bit differently when blocking than with attacking. First, blocking creatures with banding do not technically form a band in the same way attacking creatures do. Additionally, to get the benefits of banding while blocking, you only need a single creature you are blocking with to have banding. And what are these benefits, you may ask? Well, the benefit of getting to choose how your opponent's creature's damage gets assigned, of course. That's right, if you block an opponent's creature with any number of creatures, and even one of them has banding, then you get to choose how all of their damage is assigned. And once again, you can choose to overassign the damage. How about an example of what I mean? Let's say this time our opponent is attacking us with their Crawworm, and all we have is our Banalish Hero and Savannah Lions on the field. We can choose to block the Crawworm with both creatures, and because Banalish Hero has banding, we get to choose where all of that damage goes. And we can choose to assign all 6 of it onto the lions. But this isn't that different than if we had just blocked with only our Savannah Lions, right? Well, let's raise the stakes a bit and swap out our opponent's Crawworm for a Crash of Rhinos. Now their creature has Trample, so if we were to block with just a Savannah Lions, the opponent would likely assign 1 damage to our lions and 7 damage to our face. But once we throw a single creature with banding into the mix, we become the ones who decide where the Rhino damage goes, and we can choose to overassign all 8 damage onto the Savannah Lions, thus saving us from having to take any trample damage whatsoever. Thank you again, banding. So you can likely start to see where banding begins to fall a bit off the rails. Despite being a huge flavor win, it is a ginormous mechanical failure, not to mention how extremely confusing it can be. For example, what if I attack with a band of creatures that includes a flying creature, but your blocker can't block flyers? What about the same question, but with Island Walk? Or Menace? Or straight up unblockable? Well, the answer to these is simple, albeit unintuitive. If a creature can block any single creature that is part of a band, then it can block the entire band. So if your Banalish hero is banded together with your Blighted agent, then it can still be blocked by any creature that can block a Banalish hero, despite your Blighted agent's unblockable status. But what if I have a Retaliation in play, and I attack with a band of 5 creatures that gets blocked by a single creature of yours? How many, if any, creatures get +1/+1? Have you figured it out? Well, the answer is all 5 of them. That's because when a band of creatures is blocked, it causes each creature in the band to be considered blocked until the end of combat. And what if my band of 5 creatures gets blocked by your creature with banding? Well, we both assign damage for each other, of course. See, it's not complicated at all. Okay, so maybe it is a bit complicated, but honestly, aside from all of the many weird edge cases around banding, I am able to explain the core concept to a seasoned Magic player such as yourself in not too much time at all. And despite its reputation, it's actually not that much harder to understand how banding works than it is to understand how Death Touch, First Strike, and Trample interact with one another. So then why has banding been banished from the land of Magic the Gathering keywords? Well, first of all, you may have noticed that Banalish Hero doesn't have any reminder text about banding. This is partially due to the philosophy around reminder text at the time of its original printing, but you'll also find no printed version of the card with reminder text on it. The only information you get on the card is Benalia has a complex caste system that changes with the lunar year. No matter what the season, the only caste that cannot be attained by either heredity or money is that of the hero. The reason for this is because the reminder text for banding is about as long as my arm, and it reads, any creatures with banding, and up to one without, can attack in a band. Bands are blocked as a group. If any creatures with banding you control are blocking, or being blocked by a creature, you divide that creature's combat damage, not its controller, among any of the creatures it's being blocked by, or is blocking. That's 56 words. Even on a creature whose only piece of information on the text box is banding, it's still just too much text to include. Although I suppose on modern-day Magic the Gathering cards, we have just as many words, if not more, creating a greater and greater complexity of Magic the Gathering card design, but that, of course, is another video. But the length and complexity of the text needed to explain banding is not the only issue at play here. In my humble opinion, one of the biggest sins committed by banding is how disruptive it is to the new player experience. Imagine you are a new player learning Magic the Gathering for the first time. You've learned that you need the banding keyword to group your creatures together to attack as a single unit. It would be perfectly reasonable for you to also assume that in order to group multiple creatures together to block as a unit, they'd need the banding keyword as well. Now imagine you're surprised when you learn that creatures can group together on blocks by default. They don't need keywords whatsoever. So to teach banding to a new player, you have to get them to understand creatures attack independently, unless they have banding, in which case they can group together with other creatures with banding, and one additional creature. Oh, and normally you assign your own combat damage, but if my creatures are banded together, you don't get to. Oh, and creatures can either block independently or as a group, even without banding. And no, you don't get to assign my combat damage when you group up your blockers. That is, of course, unless one member of that group of blockers has banding, in which case, you know what, never mind. Now you may think this is as far as Mr. Banding's wild ride will take you, but you'd be wrong. For despite being just a momentary blip in Magic's history, they still managed to jump the shark with this keyword. Because if you are of the opinion that banding is the worst keyword ever designed for Magic, then just you wait until you hear about its twisted and demented younger brother, Bands with Others. Bands with others is a keyword that was introduced in the Legends set. There are only 2 different kinds of cards with bands with others. Master of the Hunt, which creates Wolves of the Hunt creature tokens that band with other Wolves of the Hunt, and the cycle of 5 lands that don't tap for mana, but do each grant bands with other legends to legends you control of a given color. If you can believe it, bands with others is even more complicated than banding. Or rather, it used to be. These days, it's merely as complicated as banding, but prior to them updating it back in M10, bands with others simply didn't work. It was supposed to allow your bands with others creatures to band with creatures of the stated type, but it didn't change the rules of banding that allowed you to only band with up to 1 additional non-banding creature. So it didn't matter if your Mountain Stronghold gave your other red legend bands with other legends. If those other legends didn't have banding themselves or weren't red, then you wouldn't be able to form a band with your red legend who has bands with other legends. Got it? No? After a rules change introduced with M10, bands with others started working the way it seemed like it should have always worked. If you have a legendary creature with bands with other legends, it can form a band with any number of other legends. It cannot form a band with even a single creature that is not a legend, however, despite the way regular banding works. It can, however, be a part of a non-legendary creature that has bandings banned, but it can't form a band with both that non-legendary creature with banding and a legendary creature without banding. No. Banding is not a historically bad mechanic for its complexity alone, though that certainly doesn't help its cause. Banding is a historically bad mechanic because it's complex and makes for bad gameplay. Let me prove to you why. In addition to being a bad mechanic, banding is also a highly ironic one. That's for 2 reasons. First of all, the mechanic is primarily oriented towards attacking. You can tell because the vast majority of banding rules text revolves around attacking as a band. But banding is significantly stronger on defense than it is on offense. For one thing, when you have a wide board of creatures, you're generally better off attacking with them all individually, rather than collectively. It's a detriment to allow your entire board to get chump blocked by a single 1/1, rather than force your opponent to line up blockers on each of your attackers individually. When you're blocking, on the other hand, taking the ability to assign combat damage away from your opponent is awesome. If you have a single banding creature and a board full of 1/1s, you can gang block your opponent's biggest attacking creature and assign all of its damage to your weakest blocker, since you're allowed to over-assign combat damage. You've effectively traded their best creature for your worst creature. It's even more powerful on blocks if you have a Death Touch creature alongside your bander. Then your banding creature, your Death Touch blocker, and a disposable third blocker can combine to take down any attacking creature while your bander and Death Toucher exit combat unscathed. The discrepancy between how weak banding is when attacking versus how strong it is when blocking is one key indicator that the mechanic is not working as intended. But what makes the mechanic really ironic isn't just that it doesn't work the way it's supposed to, it actually works in the opposite way from what it's supposed to. Remember that one of the main goals of banding was to create a method for breaking board stalls, but if a creature with banding is in play, it actually makes board stalls more likely because of how much better it is at blocking than attacking. In fact, its particularly potent neutralization of trample, one of the better board stall breakers ever designed, means banding is just about as egregious of a failure as you can get with a design experiment. Honestly, and I do mean this genuinely, the fact that banding is the only keyword from the original alpha set that had to be essentially discontinued more or less immediately is a testament to how fantastic a job Richard Garfield did when designing Magic the Gathering. The other 6, Flying, Trample, First Strike, Protection, Regeneration, and Landwalk, continued to show up on new Magic the Gathering cards over the years with varying degrees of frequency, though it is worth noting that Protection, Regeneration, and Landwalk were all retired some years ago. Haste and Vigilance, 2 mechanics that didn't have keywords in Alpha, but whose rules text did appear on cards in that set, also remain 2 of the most common mechanics today. At the end of the day, just because banding was a failed experiment doesn't mean it wasn't an experiment worth trying. Game design is all about taking risks. If Richard Garfield hadn't been willing to try things out, ideas that were bold, ideas that were interesting, ideas that were flavorful, we would not have the great game that we have today. And I would still be teaching community college English courses, so thank you, Richard Garfield. I got to thank and interview the man himself here. If you have not yet seen that video, you can do so by clicking the I or looking in this video's description. And of course, we have reviewed the very best and the very worst of Magic the Gathering mechanics from throughout the years, so if you would like to hear more about the great highs and extremely disastrous lows of Magic the Gathering card design, you can check out those videos as well.
Next time on Shuffle Up and Play.
What's up? It's Shuffle Up and Play, and today we have balanced our decks against a medium deck.
Mid? Do they call it? I think the kids call it mid.
But okay, off.
Your deck was bonkers, crazy, powerful.
They replaced a couple cards.
And how many was that?
20? I have a really easy turn one, a Gloom Lake Verge land.
Draw for turn.
And then I'm gonna draw for turn.
This is what I assume your lives are usually like. As influencers.
You're an influencer.
You're an influencer.
I wanna tell you this, that's what you do!
Death Cap Glade.
That a no cap? What's the, it's cap? Yeah, cap. Cap.
I want to attack, but I don't think anybody's naked. I've got a 4/4 Froggy.
Can't be naked.
What? Is this a common vibe?
Sometimes I say things and I don't know why.